Not a lot of watches on the table.
And there's a reason.
Hey everyone, it's Nathan with Crown & Caliber, and today we are talking about, you guessed it, watches. That's what we do, we talk about watches. But today we're talking about a select group of watches. We're gonna be talking about the most absurd watches that money can buy.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
So before we start talking about these absurd watches, I have a public service announcement. Go ahead and click the thumbs up and subscribe. And I know every channel asks you to do that, but it really does make a difference. It helps us to continue to make fun and entertaining content. So again, give us the thumbs up, click subscribe, and let's move on. Okay, so we are going to be talking about absurd watches. And when we say absurd, we mean watches that cost as much as cars and homes, like nice homes. Like these brands have just thrown out the rule book and said, we are going to make truly the most absurd watches. And these watches are cool just because they are cool. I mean, they just look freaking awesome. All right, so up first, we are going to be looking at Richard Mille. Now, a little bit of context. Richard Mille is a Frenchman who started a luxury Swiss watch company in the early 2000s with a friend, Dominique Guinot. Now, they had one singular focus in making their watches. They were going to make highly sophisticated, robust, easy to use watches that used the most technologically advanced materials, regardless of industry. So aerospace, F1, they are using them, and all of this was in a design that was highly influenced by architecture. Now, that is a little context on who Richard Mille is, and we want to share with you our favorite watch, the RM6702. Now, this may not be the most exotic of Richard Mille's, doesn't have a tourbillon or other crazy complications, but I do think it's one of the best expressions of the brand. Now, for starters, this watch weighs 32 grams. And to put that into context, that is basically 32 paper clips, or a little less than 6 quarters. And that's probably the closest $1.50 in Richard Mille will ever get. Now, the way that this can be a 32-gram watch is in some of its innovative technologies. Now, the case is made out of carbon and quartz TPT, and that stands for thin ply technology. And maybe not winning any awards for abbreviations here, but what this is a case made of hundreds of layers of carbon and quartz that are microns thick. And then you have a block that is cooked and then CNC'd down to create the case design. I mean, that's crazy. Then you've got the movement. The movement is pretty much made of grade 5 titanium that is then skeletonized and coated. The dial is also made of grade 5 titanium and is skeletonized and coated. The rotor is made from carbon TPT and white gold. I mean, this thing is dripping in crazy technologies. To round it out, you have a pretty humble elastic strap, but it does what it needs to do, and it keeps the watch hugged securely to one's wrist. It is a smaller timepiece coming in around 38 millimeters, and it helps it kind of just disappear on the wrist of athletes and race car drivers and people that are putting the watch in highly intense situations. So there you go, the Richard Mille 6702. Up next, we're gonna be looking at the brand Van Cleef & Arpels. Now, this is a French luxury brand known for making things like jewelry and perfume and also watches. And if you're familiar with the brand, you may recognize their style. Their dials are often beautiful gem set images, whether it's of butterflies or birds or lovers on a bridge with more traditional hands telling the time. Occasionally they will have something a little bit more novel, like a fairy with her wings and wand pointing to the time, or butterflies floating through the sky with some kind of animation on the dial. But we want to focus on the Van Cleef & Arpels Midnight Planetarium watch. Now, upon looking at this watch, it really just looks beautiful. And I think that almost does the watch a disservice in just how complex it really is. There is literally a planetarium on your wrist. Now, what that means is the dial is made up of a bunch of concentric rings. And those rings are actually made out of milled quartz called aventurine. So literally your dial is a bunch of perfectly concentric circles put together. And each one of those circles has a small gem representing a planet on it that rotates around the center rose gold sun. I mean, it is absurd. The dial is beautiful and it's coloring of what looks like a night sky and all these beautiful little planets rotating around the sun in actual representation of what they would look like in the night sky. And it's not lost on Van Cleef & Arpels that this needs to tell time. So to tell time, there is a small gold shooting star that rotates around the dial once, representing the 24-hour scale to keep time for you. And just to put into further context how impressive this is, it's an automatic watch. It is 43 millimeters in diameter, so
oh God, I hope it's an automatic. Can you imagine trying to reset that?
So it is a little on the larger side, but it's only 13 millimeters thick. I mean, that's effectively the thickness of a Submariner. And last time I checked, there wasn't a solar system in a Submariner. So Van Cleef, you got one on Rolex there. So, I mean, it's just, it's absurd. I don't know what else to say. Like, it's just, you see it and it reminds me, and this is kind of silly, but it reminds me of Orion's belt, and not necessarily the constellation, but I'm specifically referring to the little animation from Men in Black, where they go inside this little gem set on the cat's necklace of an entire solar system, you know, that's this big. And when you look at the Midnight Planetarium watch, there is that whimsical kind of playful nature to it, but underneath it is just something truly absurd. That watch was also Matt Damon. I'm sure it was a publicity stunt, but he wore that at the Oscars
For The Martian.
Which is kind of like, oh yeah,
of course
cool.
he did.
So next in our absurd watches is the brand Uhrwerk. Now, this is a younger brand. They started in 1997 by Felix Baumgartner, not the dude that jumps out of planes and sets Mach records, but an artist and a man named Martin Fry. They basically set out to make watches as artists interpreting time in a different way. And boy, these watches are definitely different. They are avant-garde. Often they are interpreting time in a linear manner or in a unique digital manner, and the Uhrwerk that we're looking at today is no different. So the Uhrwerk that we want to focus on is the UR-CC1 King Cobra. I cannot make up the name for this watch. We're talking about a rectangular case shape that's around 43 millimeters of gold. Uhrwerk claims it's gray gold and it has a titanium case back. I mean, truly, this watch is absurd, and that is only the beginning. The timekeeping on this watch is a mixture of digital displays, what looks to be a Fibonacci spiral, and linear bars that fill up and then retrograde, completely disappear. It's absurd, and Uhrwerk has done a great job on making something that is extremely luxurious, but at the same point, kind of looks like something from Back to the Future, or I mean, they even describe it as something in maybe a vintage car dashboard. It has a very retro feel to it, but it's still absurd and unattainable and luxury in the best way. And there you go, the Uhrwerk UR-CC1 King Cobra. So next in our absurd watches, we are going to be looking at the brand MB&F. And it is worth noting before we jump in to talk about MB&F that they have actually done a collaboration with Uhrwerk, creating an experimental timepiece called the Nitro. And that is not what we're going to highlight, but you can definitely go check that out if you are interested. So MB&F is a watch brand founded by Maximilien Bucer. And funny enough, the brand actually stands for Maximilien Bucer and Friends. So I don't know if it's just a bunch of his buddies making watches, but you can definitely tell that this is a passion project of his. And for the record, Maximilien is no stranger to watches. He used to work as a senior manager for JLC and then eventually was the CEO of Harry Winston before going off and starting MB&F. So clearly Mr. Maximilien knows watches. And again, when you see MB&F watches, you can tell that they are a passion project. He just seems to be having fun with these designs. He makes crazy desktop robots, desktop spider clocks. Like, the things are absurd, and that's why we're talking about them. And they do a really good job of displaying time in intricate and unique ways, whether it's watches that just look like frog eyes or just absurd globes and orbs coming off of designs. But today we're going to focus on horological machine number 7, also known as the Aquapod. Now, Maximilien Bucer's inspiration for this is actually based on a jellyfish And I think that is a perfect way to describe this. This watch is a mechanical jellyfish. I mean, in every way, that's what it feels like. From looking at it, the thing is a domed sapphire crystal, and smack dab in the center is a 60-second floating tourbillon. After that, you've got two concentric circles representing the minutes and the hours as they rotate around one another. And then on the back of the watch, equally just as domed, is a titanium rotor that looks like tentacles with a platinum underbelly and luminova striping so that it glows in the dark. And to top it off, because it is inspired by a jellyfish, it does have a rotating bezel, unidirectional, just like a dive watch. Wouldn't take this diving, and it floats separate from the case itself. I mean, the only word to describe this watch is absurd. You can have it in titanium, you can have it in platinum, you can have it in red gold, black bezels, green bezels, red bezels, blue bezels. I mean, when you see this watch, it doesn't look like something you would ever actually wear, but just appreciate for truly how absurd it is. I commend Mr. Bucer for just living it out and making watches that truly exhibit some of the craziest designs that there are. So there you go, the HM07 Aquapod. So now moving on from MB&F and the Aquapod, we are going to stay in fluids. We are now looking at the brand HYT. They first released a watch in 2012, and their big appeal was they were using fluid to tell time, to represent the time. And what that looks like is there is actually a fluid-filled tube that goes around the outside of the dial and fills up and then depletes in a retrograde fashion to represent the hours. Now, other than that, it looks like a pretty normal watch. You have the minutes and a running seconds hand and a power reserve on the dial. And then below that, you have two large pistons and billows that are pushing the fluid through the tube around the outside of the dial. It is a pretty crazy design when you first see it. And we want to actually pick the H0 as our favorite. And the reason is the H0 kind of covers up a lot of the underworkings on the dial. So you really have this fluid-filled tube that kind of arcs around the top outside of the dial. The piston billows down there at 6 o'clock, pushing the fluid through for the hours. And then you have the minutes in the center, the seconds hand to the left, and the power reserve on the right. So it really focuses in on this fluid moving around the dial. It's whimsical because it almost looks like something from like Power Rangers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, this crazy fluid getting pushed to the dial, and especially at night when the superluminova from under the dial comes through and it makes it look like the fluid is glowing in different colors. It is a truly unique design, and it is not small. We're talking about a 48mm case. I mean, you are wearing a hockey puck of crazy, absurd horology on your wrist when you wear an HYT. So there you go, the fluid-filled HYT H0.
Would you consider that like hydrohorology?
Hydrohorology.
Could you?
I mean, it depends. Does hydro mean water though? I'm sure that stuff is not water.
Yeah, that is not
This
water.
is not potable.
Not potable water.
If you break your HYT, run. All right, so moving from the HYT and its fluid-filled tube around the dial, we're gonna one-up it with the brand Resonance. Now, Resonance, if you were to look at it, looks kind of like some quirky digital display, but what is really happening is some serious feats of mechanical watchmaking and engineering. So what you basically have is you have a watch that has a fluid-filled dial. The entire dial is filled with oil, and that's just the top half. Now, you of course can't have a movement that is completely submerged in oil. That would be a disaster. So what they've managed to do is completely separate the two. The movement is sealed in the bottom half of the watch, and the top half of the watch, the dial, is an oil-filled chamber. So how this works is something called the Resonance ROX, which is the Resonance Orbital Convex System. And essentially what you have is high-powered magnets that are around a central driven minutes post that literally hold the two together and make the discs move. Now, That's all complex. And if you are to look at the watch for the first time, it could be a little, let's say, difficult to read. But very quickly, after seeing one in action and operating one, you see how novel and intuitive and, to put it bluntly, ingenious the design is. It's also worth noting that the Resonance Type 3 that we are referring to is driven by a custom ETA 2824. Now, I'm sure that it is all but recognizable to a watchmaker as a 2824, but it's crazy to see Resonance using such a ubiquitous, for lack of better words, common movement to create such an absurd watch like the Resonance Type 3. But back to its design, back to the layout. If you are looking at the dial, you're going to see in the outermost ring the date. A little closer in is the minute track, and then there is a dial for the hours. There is one for the days of the week and an AM/PM indicator, the oil temperature, more on that in a second, and the running seconds. Now, as the time advances based on the minutes, all of these little dials orbit around the actual dial itself in a way that no other watch represents. And it is truly a unique design. It's almost playful and mesmerizing in how it operates. And you may be staring at the screen being like, but Nathan, why is there an oil-filled case? I mean, you've got problems now with magnets and potential oil everywhere and pistons mitigating the oil and a highly complex system. Well, it does something really cool. That oil has a similar refractive index to the sapphire crystal. And so what that essentially does is projects the dial itself up onto the crystal, and so there is zero distortion when you look down at the watch. And if all the absurdity of this Resonance Type 3 is a little mind-numbing or confusing, wait until you turn off the lights, because everything is luminescent. So now you've got these floating, glowing indicators that create a truly interesting and, I'll say it again, absurd appearance. The Resonance Type 3, an oil-filled chamber powered by a pretty standard ETA movement to create a wholly new, wholly absurd timepiece. There you go. All right, guys, so rounding out our list of absurd watches is from the brand H. Moser & Co. Now, this brand is great for so many reasons, and we'll just hit some of the highlights. It's basically like if there was an internet troll of watch manufacturers, it would be H. Moser & Co. So here you go. In 2016, they released a watch that is a mechanical watch that basically looks like an Apple Watch, which is a pretty solid troll move. But they decided to one-up themselves. In 2017, they released a watch, and it is literally made of Swiss cheese. I can't make that up. But to top it off, we are going to look at the H. Moser & Co. Swiss Alp Concept Black. Now, the Swiss Alp is basically that Apple Watch design, but the Concept Black takes it to an entirely different level. You basically have a 45mm platinum designed watch that looks like an Apple Watch with a floating tourbillon at 6 o'clock. The dial, completely black, completely blank. It literally looks like you have an Apple Watch that won't turn on. There are no hands, there are no indicators. It is a flying tourbillon, so how do you tell the time? It is a minute repeater. And this is a perfect example of a brand just making a watch because they can. So you have a watch that doesn't represent the time visually in any way, and to tell the time, you actuate the minute repeater and it chimes the time for you. And if that's not just crazy enough, the ingenuity in this design is a step further. And that's how you set the watch. How would you set a watch that you cannot see what the time is? So they went in and designed a movement that the crown, when pulled out, one full rotation would advance the time 1 hour. Now on the crown, there is a tiny black indicator, and when you pull the crown out, there are 12 more tiny black indicators, each representing 5 minutes. So there's a little math involved. What you do is you chime the time using the minute repeater, make sure you note that time, and then pull the crown out using the black indicators and the knowledge of 1 revolution is 1 hour to set the time. And of course, when you are finished, you can check again with the repeating function of the minute repeater. I mean, just so absurd.
It's brilliant.
It's brilliant. And it looks like you are wearing just another Apple Watch, except it is anything but. And that is the Swiss Alp Concept Black from H. Moser. And that, my friends, will round out our list of 7 of the most absurd watches that money can buy. Guys, we love doing videos like this. Let us know in the comments below what you think about our list of 7 watches. Let us know some other watches that you think are truly absurd and really represent that, hey, just because we can, we're gonna go and make it. And as always, thanks for watching.